Fame and Fortune Weekly, Stories of Boys Who Make Money, Number 8, New York, November 24th, 1905. Published by Frank Tousey. The Wheel of Fortune, or The Record of a Self-Made Boy, by a Self-Made Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Keith Salis. Chapter 1. On the Lowest Rung of the Ladder.
I've got you, young scamp. Hand over your wages at once, or I'll thump you black and blue.
The man who uttered these fierce words had just sprung out of a nearby hedge and collared a boy who had been walking along a lonesome stretch of country road. He was a big, husky-looking man with a bloated, unshaven face and a pair of dark eyes that at the moment shone with a fierce, unnatural light. His clothes were faded, threadbare, and dirty, patched in a dozen places and frayed at the wrists and ankles where they had shrunk until they looked a couple of sizes too small for the wearer. His bloodshot eyes and his thick speech showed that he was partially intoxicated. The boy he had grasped by the jacket was a bright, good-looking lad of 17, almost as poorly attired as himself. The look on his face showed that he had been taken by surprise, but for all that he was prepared to resist the aggressor to the last. And these two, sad to relate, were father and son.
Did you hear what I said?
Roared the man, shaking the boy roughly.
I heard you,
replied the youth doggedly.
Then cough up, do you hear?
With another shake. I've only got $3, and you know we need every cent of it for the house, for mother is sick, and this is all we have to live on for the next week, answered the lad in a tone of indignant remonstrance.
You can keep one, then, so hand over the other two, and I'll let you go,
his father replied, slightly loosening his grip, as if he expected the boy would now comply with his request. The lad, however, had no such intention, but instead took immediate advantage of the chance presented to wrench himself free of his father's grasp and spring back a yard out of his reach.
Confound you, you little monkey!
Growled the man, making a dive forward to get a hold of the boy again, but he might have saved himself the trouble. The boy started across the road with great agility, while his father's feet got all tangled up and he landed in a heap, a truly pitiable object, in the middle of the turnpike. He pulled himself up into a sitting posture, shook his fist at his son, and used language which caused the lad to shudder in disgust.
I'll pickle you for this, Bert Hawley,
he roared in impotent rage.
Just wait till I catch you at home. I'll beat the very life out of you.
Father, began the boy, hesitating to leave his parent in the condition he was.
Shut up, you little jackanapes.
Won't you come home? You know how sick mother is. And the tears welled up in the boy's eyes.
I'll come home when I get good and ready, do you understand? You're an ungrateful cub. Give me $1 and I'll let it go with that.
Ned Hawley, once strong, handsome, and industrious, now a wreck and a slave of the demon rum, blinked at the boy he ought to have loved and encouraged his efforts to support a weak and dying mother and now worthless father. But shame or repentance was not in the miserable man's line. He had sunk too low to be moved by any worthy consideration. What he wanted most of all at that moment was liquor. His debauched appetite craved the stimulant. He could not get it without money, for his credit was gone at the village rum shop, and he was indifferent if his wife and son starved through the loss of the $3 he knew his son was bringing home that afternoon and which he coveted. He would have half killed the boy there and then could he have gotten him once more into his clutches, if there was no other way of getting the money from him. Poor Bert's lot at that moment was not one to be envied. No, said the boy, shaking his head decidedly. You want to spend it for liquor. I'll never give you a cent for that purpose.
Won't you?
Roared his father, staggering to his feet.
We'll see whether you won't.
He picked up a big stone out of the dust and threw it vengefully at the lad's head. The missile missed Bert by a hair. Had it landed as intended by the drunken wretch, the boy would really have been fatally injured. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, father, said Bert in indignant surprise.
Are you going to give me that money?
No. Ed Hawley reached for another stone. That settled the matter with Bert, who turned and made off down the road as fast as he could go, pursued by several stones, which, however, went wide of their mark. The village of Jayville was close at hand, through which he would have to pass on his way to the miserable dwelling he called home. He intended to stop at the drugstore and get some medicine the doctor had ordered for his mother, who was in the last stages of consumption, aggravated by lack of proper nourishment, as well as by the cruel neglect and harsh conduct of her husband. "I'll have to hustle on," murmured the boy, as the mutterings of distant thunder struck upon his ears, "or I'll catch a shower bath before I get home." And he soon struck the tree-shadowed main street of the village. In a few minutes he entered the drugstore. "Hello, Bert," said the druggist, coming forward. "What can I do for you?" "I want this prescription filled," said the boy, tendering him the slip of paper the doctor had left with him that morning. "How is your mother? Any better?" asked the pharmacist, taking the slip and glancing over it. Bert shook his head sadly. "I'm sorry to hear that," said the man sympathetically, for Mrs. Hawley was well liked throughout the neighborhood. Her unassuming personality and sweet disposition, as well as her many kind deeds in the past, had not been forgotten by those who rarely, if ever, saw her now. "It'll take me a quarter of an hour to put this up," said the druggist. "I'll be back by that time. I have a few things to buy." Bert went over to Mr. Bentley's, the butcher, and purchased a small chicken. Then he went down to the general store on the corner and bought some tea, sugar, and a few other necessities. As he was leaving the store, a well-dressed boy of 16, with a not over-agreeable face, ran into him at the doorway, dislodging one of his packages, which fell to the floor in the newcomer's path. "Who are you butting into, you pauper?" snarled the dudish boy, whose name was Jonas Potts. "Can't you see what you're doing?" And he deliberately kicked the package across the floor. The paper split open, and a pound of sugar was mixed with the sawdust. "Shame on you, Jonas!" cried a girlish voice at this juncture. A handsomely dressed miss of 15, his sister Helen, had followed Master Potts into the store and observed his ungentlemanly conduct. She was a decidedly pretty girl with rosy cheeks, whose color was now heightened by the indignant flush which overspread her features. "Oh, what's the matter with you?" retorted her brother roughly, as he turned on his heel, marched over to the counter, and called for a package of cigarettes, one of which he speedily lighted, and then turned to regard Bert Hawley with a sneer of contempt. "I'm very sorry that my brother should act so rudely to you, Bert," said Helen Potts. "He is a headstrong, willful boy, and I am ashamed of his conduct. You shall not lose your sugar. I know you cannot afford it." "Never mind, Miss Helen. I can buy another pound. It was perhaps my fault that I got in his way, but I did not see him coming." "Of course you didn't. How could you, with all those packages?" "Mr. Tarbox," she said, turning to the clerk who had waited on Jonas, "put up a couple of pounds of sugar for Bert Hawley. My brother will pay you for it." "I will like fun," snorted Jonas Potts with an angry frown. "If you won't, I will, and I'll tell Mother just as soon as I get home," replied the girl spiritedly. "I'd rather you let me pay for it, Miss Helen," broke in Bert earnestly. "No, Bert, that certainly wouldn't be fair. Jonas has no right to make a football of your package. Had he left it where it fell, the damage would not have occurred." Helen Potts took the bundle of sugar from the clerk and carefully placed it on Bert's arm. "How is your mother today?" "She was feeling very ill this morning when I went away." "I'm sorry to hear that," replied the girl with a look of sympathetic interest. "I will call to see her tomorrow. If there's anything Mother or I can do for her, you must let us know." "Thank you, Miss Helen. You're very kind to say so. I'm afraid Mother won't last long." And the boy choked back a sob, while his eyes were suffused with tears. "I'm so sorry, Bert," answered Helen, laying one hand on the boy's arm almost caressingly, a mute expression of her girlish sympathy. Jonas puffed his cigarette and regarded the pair with scornful indifference. "Sis makes me tired," he sniffed at Tarbox the clerk. "What she can see in that beggar I can't imagine. Look at his rags. Why, our scarecrows are rigged out better." This comparison brought a grin of malicious satisfaction to his face. "Are you going to settle for that sugar?" asked the clerk, "or will Miss Helen?" "I suppose I will have to," replied Jonas, tossing a quarter on the counter. "But I hate to do it, all right. If I refuse, Sis would make a fuss at the house. However, I'll make it my business to get square with him for it at the first chance," and he bent an evil glance at Bert. "If I only had a sister like you, Miss Helen, I think I shouldn't feel quite so sad and dispirited at times," said Bert with a wistful look into the girl's face. "She'd be such a comfort to Mother, and I shall never forget you as long as I live. Although you're rich, you never look down on us, like the rest of the people have done since we got so poor. I may say you've been Mother's truest friend right along, and she never forgets you in her prayers. And now, good-bye. There's a storm coming up, and I must get home as soon as I can. Good-bye, Bert. Remember, I am your friend as well as your mother's." She pressed the boy's hand and gave him a look he never forgot from that day. End of chapter 1.